Years ago, I made this infographic about how Batman is said to have done 127 styles by Scott Beatty in The Ultimate Guide to the Dark Knight, and how that's completely unrealistic, right? And then I went over a little bit of simple math to go over it. I'm going to go ahead and put that infographic up here, and if I think about it, I'll put it in Substack. Not overly critical. That infographic is posted up around. I actually recently redid it just to make it a little, in my opinion, nicer looking, but that's me. So it says Batman's, master of 127 styles. So, what do you mean by master, right? Because you're talking comic book artists who are generally not skilled in these things. They probably just are kind of assuming that you can reach mastery in a short amount of time. And then, of course, Batman's the best of the best, right? He's part of the world's finest, whereas like Superman is the best metahuman. Batman is the best human. So that's all fine. But the question is, right, over what time frame, considering the job that he's doing and all that, right? So what we look at is, in order to become, this is where I kind of start my numbers, in order to become like an Olympic qualifier athlete, right? It takes 4 to 8 years, depending on the sport and the complexity of the skills and everything. Most martial arts are actually quite a bit more complicated than even Olympic combat sports. Like Olympic judo is fairly stripped down. Olympic taekwondo is stripped down. Olympic boxing, I mean, it's still boxing, right? But boxing is already fairly stripped down. It's not quite as complex as learning, say, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is very complex and tends to take a long time to learn, or some of these traditional martial arts that have a lot of nitpicky nuance and stuff. And again, some of that you could probably excise out of this and be okay, but that's not the point. I'm also looking at, say, let's just say a 20-year career, right? Let's say, 10 years in training, 10 years on the job. Real human beings not going to last much longer than that doing Batman's work, and probably a lot less. We definitely are going to have to apply the 80-20 rule. Maybe we're not looking at that 10,000 hour mastery. Maybe we're looking at the 2,000 hour black belt, right? And we've covered this in a recent video. If you 80-20 that 4 to 8 years down, that's going to be 0.8 to 1.6 years to develop a skill to that competitive level, assuming that black belt is that competitive level. Which honestly, if you average that out, it's just a hair over 1 per year, but let's just assume that you're gifted like Batman, and call it one art per year at that. So how do we go about doing this? So if you're looking at 1 per year, right, 20 years is going to be 20 arts over the course of that time, right? It's not even close to 127 different styles, like not even close. But we could probably bump that up a little bit, right? Because there are a couple of phenomena that are pretty useful here. One is going to be similarity of baseline. Right? If you have established fundamentals, you're not going to need to relearn those fundamentals. And if you're working with a good teacher, good coach, they are going to fast track you through those fundamentals for the sake of getting you to the stuff that you actually need. Right now, if you're not working with a good one, right, you're just going to be going through the process no matter what you've learned, and like you're probably still going to move faster through because they're not going to be able to ignore your competency. But for the most part, right, let's just assume that if you establish fundamentals, you're going to be able to move through certain things faster, right? If you have a good striking base, you're not going to need to continue to learn straight punches and hooks and uppercuts, and if you have kickboxing, you're not the fundamental kicks, the various straight kicks and round kicks and whatnot. You are going to be all right. Now, again, depending on the teacher or coach you have, they may want you to do it specifically their way, but you're Batman, which means you're doing it your way. You're going to them to understand the nuances and differences and all of that so that you don't have any blind spots. And that's the reality here. That's what we're really looking at, is we want to eliminate blind spots. It's not that we need to know everything or have every tool in our toolbox. Is we want to eliminate blind spots so that we can use the tools that we have to our advantage. that is really important with, for Batman, right? We understand that Batman's whole thing is preparedness. So eliminating blind spots is a huge part of it. Having a massive toolbox is part of that too, but eliminating blind spots is a massive part of that, right? So you don't necessarily have to master a bunch of different arts. You just want to eliminate the blind spots so you kind of know what you're dealing with, right? You also, and look, in this Batman thing, we're not actually talking about rank. We're actually talking about skill and experience. But if we were talking about rank, right, you could definitely pump those numbers up with honorary ranks, because a lot of times people who have done, say, like Shuai Jiao can get an honorary black belt in judo depending on the teacher in the school that they go to, because they're so similar. They're not identical, but they're so similar that they're going to be at least fast tracked, because you're talking about jacket wrestling, right? Catch wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Josh Barnett has an honorary black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu despite the fact that he is a catch wrestler. Does it matter? Don't know, right? Sambo, kind of the same deal, right? How many different karate-derived styles are based off of Shotokan? You get a Shotokan black belt, you're going to have an easier time learning all that other stuff. Right now, look, Taekwondo's gone so far off of that you may still have difficulty with Taekwondo. But, and I don't mean difficulty as in it's going to be hard, but difficulty in the sense that it's going to be different enough that you may be required to modify techniques down to certain nuances. And this is where, like, personalizing something to you versus doing it the way they want you to is going to matter a lot. And then the real question is, like, what do you actually need, right? Do you need 127 styles, or are there 127 distinct styles? That depends on who you ask and how they define distinct. But I would argue, yeah, you probably can kind of enumerate it out. But here's the thing, right? If you're learning boxing, do you have to learn American boxing, Russian boxing, Mexican boxing, Cuban boxing? Do you have to learn all of those? Or do you just have to learn how to box and deal with all of those? That's a huge distinction, right? So you want to learn something that is probably in the boxing, kickboxing category. And you don't have to be the best at any of those things, because you're not dealing with competition formats. You just need to not have any blind spots and be competent enough that you can outbox the majority of people, right? Then you're going to need something maybe more in that traditional martial arts camp, which is going to involve like holding and hitting, dirty strikes and stuff. Do you have to know everything? No. But you need something that is going to have a good enough breadth of options. You may want to do something that's more long range, and you may want to do something that's more close range, so that you can bridge those gaps. But fundamentally, right, you could do, like, I don't know, Baji and an Okinawan karate style and probably be covered, like, Motobu Ryu or something like that. Like, you could probably get away with that, right? Of course, like, I'm a Wing Chun guy, but that's neither here nor there. I never did Taekwondo, but between Kempo and Sabat, I can keep up with Taekwondo guys fine. I can't do their tricks, but I can do fine with that. I'm not really blind to their tricks, despite the fact that I have not trained Taekwondo, right? So those kind of things are useful. On the grappling side of things, right, you should definitely learn a wrestling style. I would argue catch wrestling, because it kind of covers all of the bases. But even if you were just looking at folk style, freestyle, Greco-Roman's a little more specialty. I do think you should play with some Greco-Roman. And again, if you do catch wrestling, you're going to get a lot of that stuff. But American folk style is literally derived from catch wrestling, right? It's catch wrestling without the hooks. I mean, and of course, without the hooks, it does change a lot of the tactics, and we are 100 years plus removed from that. So it is significantly different at this point. But having that body-to-body wrestling style is going to do you wonders, right? And we've already seen that wrestling is absolutely the most dominant force in mixed martial arts. So definitely you need to learn a wrestling style. You should probably learn some jacket grappling. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not going to be easy, but if you have a wrestling base, then adding the submissions is not going to be that hard. Learning the grips isn't going to be that hard. You should probably definitely learn jacket throwing, because BJJ is not going to teach you that, so you definitely need some judo. If you go with like Kosen Judo, you may get enough ground fighting to deal with that plus the catch wrestling, or if you just did sambo, you would kind of get all of that. So like you can cover that pretty well. So you don't need a lot, right? You could probably, if we're talking over a 20-year career, learning 20 arts, you can probably fit all that in. Should you learn something with like improvised weapons? Yeah, I mean, like, so Filipino martial arts is a nice go-to, and like stick work, and of course in Filipino martial arts, stick is correlating to the short swords that they use, and to knives, but that's also a huge leg up on improvised weapons. But maybe you want to learn something else, right? And that's where maybe some of the weird Chinese weapons or the Okinawan Kobudo comes in, because you're going to get some stuff that's a little more unorthodox as far as Western martial arts go. Like I went the HEMA route, and there's plenty of variety in HEMA. And the thing is that, like, look, saber fencing is really easy to learn, harder to master, but it's easy to learn, right? Rapier fencing is very easy to learn. Side swords a little bit more, back swords a little bit more, because these are slightly more complex cut and thrust systems. Two-handed swords, fairly easy to start with. And again, you're not necessarily looking at mastery. But the thing is, as soon as you learn how to do those things, then you can pick up improvised weapons and use them in a similar fashion. Again, like cane fighting is based on saber. Great stick fighting is based on two-handed sword, right? Truncheon fighting is often, I mean, well, look, most truncheon fighting is just truncheon fighting, right? You're just clubbing each other. But you can correlate some of that to, short sword and dagger fighting to a small degree. The only thing you'd be really missing would be like flexible weapons. Flexible weapons are their own thing, and it's something that you may want to dive into, and that's kind of where Chinese martial art shines, with things like rope dart and meteor hammer. Or if you want to do like Anthony DeLodge's stuff with a bullwhip, that's cool. There's some things in there, right, that you can kind of flesh that out with. And I would even argue that those things can probably take more of a part-time backseat, as opposed to doing things so dedicatedly with your hand-to-hand. And absolutely, of course, because we live in the modern world. Look, I know Batman is famous for not really using guns, but you probably need to absolutely understand that kind of stuff, right? So going and learning how to handle firearms and do so in a way that is tactically viable. There are organizations that will actually teach you how to do things like clearing a building. And so it's not just target practice, right? Going and doing target practice is important, but that's not gunfighting. So you want to learn from somebody that can actually teach you how to do things like clearing a building and apprehending somebody and all of that in a way that allows you to use your firearms effectively. Probably want to learn arresting techniques for handcuffs and stuff. And again, you probably don't need to dedicate a ton of time to that by comparison, but you want to dedicate enough to it that you're not fumbling around with that stuff. So again, I think it's entirely doable over a 20-year career, to slide in like black belt or near black belt on a dozen or more arts. Right? We established before, you got somewhere in the ballpark of about 25 hours a week that you can dedicate to things. Look, if you're one of these workaholics, you're going to have less, right? And if you're satisfied with less money or you're independently wealthy, you may have a lot more. But we established, right, for the 10,000 hour rule, 80-20 down to 2,000 hours. If you're training 10 hours a week, you're looking at 4 years. And if you're training 3 hours a week, you're looking at more like 13 years. And that's for any given skill, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing things in stepwise fashion, that you get fundamentals and then you build on top of that. So that kind of cuts that down a little bit and allows you to build more and more and more on top of that, right? So again, start with something like kickboxing and wrestling, work your way up to some traditional stuff, and then work your way up to weapons and and modern stuff and modern arresting and paramilitary military tactics and whatnot, and you'll have a pretty good baseline covered, I think, pretty well. So how many can you really learn? Honestly, that's on you and how much you're willing to put in and all of that. But like I said, over a 20-year career, doing things in this fashion and doing things kind of correctly, yeah, you could probably load up basic first dan level or equivalency of skill, somewhere probably between a dozen and 20 arts. Maybe more if you do things really right and you're quick, and maybe less if you're taking it a little more casual. 127 is out of the question, but it's also just completely not necessary, right? It's just completely not necessary. You can get away with, let's do just a quick count. Let's just kind of streamline things. Let's just say kickboxing, assuming that you're getting good hands with it, right? Kickboxing, wrestling, jacket grappling, and let's say ground grappling, jacket throwing, because they tend to be a little bit separate these days, but you could streamline that with sambo. Let's say long range traditional martial art, close range traditional martial art. And again, this could be any number of things. There's enough similarity between them. You don't really need to know all of them. You just need to know some fundamentals. Basic manual weapons, which FMA is a good choice, but there are other options, including HEMA. As much as you may go, hey, I'm never going to get into a sword fight, it's still really, really helpful. And again, a good Chinese martial art that actually trains that way, you're going to get the weapons involved in that. So that's another option there. You definitely need firearms training that is actual tactical firearms training, not just target practice. And let's just say like apprehension and arresting techniques. That is less than 10. That is 9 arts. 9 arts. That's doable. And that's going to cover most of your bases. 9 arts is going to cover the majority of what you need to be able to do what you need to do. And if you need to switch to something where your opponent is weak, you've got enough tools in your tool belt that you go, look, if this guy's outboxing me, I'm going to grapple him, or I'm going to go to weapons if the threat level's too high, or whatever, right? You've got a lot of options here in 9 arts. You don't need 127. You just don't. So I love Batman. I'm a huge Batman fan, and I'm totally going to be raising my kids on Batman. But the fact is that we're not talking about 127 styles. And granted, that is over the lifetime of the character being written in comic books and people just being inconsistent with how they write things. That's not really a true count, but that's another story for another time. Everybody loves to have the whole master of martial arts thing. You know what it takes to be a master of martial arts? Being in full control of your body, under stress, and having the tools at your disposal to deal with those threats. Does that mean that you know every technique ever? No. It means that you have enough tools to deal with every threat that comes at you. So, that being the case, go out and become Batman. I'll talk to you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Check us out on our other socials, and please head over to blacksunboxing.com to get a little more info, including how to contact us. Furthermore, if you are in the Phoenix area, please feel free to stop in, say hi, join in for a class, whatever. Also, if you ever see us cite sources or just for additional content, please check out our Substack. That is where we put all of the sources we use in our videos and is a major part of this. Plus, it serves as a membership platform for long distance learning and for people who would like to support us but aren't local. We would greatly appreciate it if you signed up. Even just the free membership helps us out a lot. All right, I will see you guys in the next video. Good journey.